Does Foxhole have a future? A dramatic question indeed, and to help you answer that question, we must separate the short-term future from the years ahead. Firstly, we're going to summarise what you, my noble wardens, and the muggy green colonials have identified as the main issues since the Inferno update, before analysing whether the newest update gives us cause for optimism in the months ahead. But that is just the beginning. We will then travel back in time and analyse the lessons of the past to help us answer the ultimate question: does Foxhole have a future in the years to come? Now, of course, we've got to do all of this time travelling in style, so do we jump into the TARDIS, pick up the keys to the DeLorean, or do the naked Terminator man in a sphere thing? We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's take the pussy wagon, shall we? As the flux capacitor warms up and we accelerate to 88 miles per hour, here are the main issues going back to the Inferno update of September 2022, as highlighted by you in the comments below my Foxhole Has a Problem video, link in the description if you want to see those comments for yourself. Logistics and building both feel like you're working a second job, as facilities in particular are bloody tedious. Trains were very exciting. Yay, trains! But difficult to organise and are realistically for the clan man. Speaking of which, the game appears to have less and less for solo players or groups of friends to actually do. The game could use an updated tutorial, and finally, the big one, alts. For those of you who don't know what alts are, the Oxford English Dictionary defines them as players with a micro-penis who feel the need to create a second account for the sole purpose of playing on the other team and causing havoc by doing all sorts of things that an individual with a micro-penis would feel the need to do to compensate for the fact that they have a teeny tiny micro-penis. I think we can agree that's more than enough penis for this video. That is by no means all of the issues, but those are the big ones that come up time and again. So let's take those issues and fast forward back to the present, and examine how many of those issues the new update addresses, and by how much, to help you form an opinion on the near future of Foxhole. Here's a 30-second overview of the new changes in the style of the world's granddad, David Attenborough. The map legend has been improved, which is genuinely pleasing to the eye. You can see railways on the map now, so we know the true winner of each war will be the team with the most dick-shaped railways on the map. Supplies have been simplified into maintenance supplies, ensuring repair and decay is less tedious. Dragon's teeth can be seen in abundance, and liquid container train cars are a thing, further reducing tedium. If an alt dumps a truck into a river, the inventory may just be reinstated to the stockpile. There's a ton of new information in the structure logs and the vehicle logs because information is power against alts. Gates now close automatically. Sadly, we can't joyride a vehicle if an enemy is already inside. Probably sensible. And there's been a mountain of bandwidth optimization. Yeah. If you want a full summary of the changes, the devs did an hour-long stream, along with a summary on Steam, and as always, I Saw a Bear has created an excellent video summarizing the changes, all of which I'll link in the description below for your perusal. So, does this new mini-update solve the aforementioned problems? Ultimately, no, but there are so many positive, albeit small, changes that added together, this is a major step forward for Foxhole that does a lot towards many of those problems, and the devs made it clear that a big update is also on the horizon. Or in other words, forget everything I've just said and simply replace it with Dev Man Good. While on the subject of the dev man, I wanted to highlight that when discussing the server optimizations, the devs repeatedly said that they realize this isn't a flashy or exciting subject, but I disagree. I believe the Foxhole community is largely interested in that level of detail, on what is happening under the hood, so to speak. Or is that just me? Anyway, back to the update. So based on everything we've just discussed, the near future looks very bright indeed for Foxhole. We've been through a rough patch, sure, and I'll miss riding around in a vehicle with a very confused enemy. But the player numbers are looking decent, and many of those seem to be newer, lower-ranked players. So is the next stop the stratosphere and then the moon? Well, here's the thing. Even if Foxhole solves the core problems, and player numbers are subsequently on the rise in the short term, in the long term, Foxhole will eventually hit a major barrier that other games simply don't have to worry about. This barrier is best explained by hopping back into the DeLorean, because a wise man once said, to predict the future, we must learn the lessons of the past. I completely made that up, but I'm sure someone wise with a big beard has said that before. Probably Gandalf. Now, let's take a look at Exhibit A, which summarizes the state of Foxhole rather nicely, while also highlighting the biggest threat to Foxhole's future. And for those of you that are new to the channel, I do love a cheeky player count graph. So, we've travelled back in time and arrived here. September 2022, back when the Rings of Power released. Oh, that went well. But it's also when Foxhole saw its full Inferno release, and as you can see, the player numbers have surged. But what happens as we travel forward in time? Yeah, but that's expected, right? They never stay right up. Oh dear. Awkward. As you're probably aware, a Foxhole shard can only handle a certain number of players, so we went from 1 Able shard to 3 Able, Baker, and Charlie shards to accommodate the sheer number of new players. Sounds great, right? Well, how did that go? It didn't go smoothly. Foxhole is so dependent on player numbers, much more than any other game I can think of. It's not Call of Duty full of a bazillion small servers hosting 15-minute matches with 20 players each that can simply expand and contract as player numbers fluctuate without affecting the individual player experience. It's one huge map, 24/7, with hundreds if not thousands of players at any one time, fighting the same war. Whenever Foxhole opens or closes a shard, it's a big deal, and the game suffers hugely from growing pains, or shrinking pains for that matter. But if Foxhole wants to grow in the long term, it will eventually need to sustain multiple shards, and seeding a new shard long term is much easier said than done when it's on this kind of scale, all day, every day. It sucks when the player numbers are too low, for obvious reasons, but there is a practical limit when Able Shard can't handle any more players. Or in other words, the huge persistent war is Foxhole's biggest strength, but also its biggest constraint. And that makes it very difficult for the game to grow beyond one shard. As highlighted by the September 2022 growth and decline, albeit there were many other factors at play. But if that wasn't enough, maintaining a balance between the two opposing teams further complicates matters. Ultimately, the player numbers need to be at least somewhat consistent for the Foxhole system to work, and each shard needs to be somewhat consistently full to remain viable in its own right. So perhaps this is ultimately why, over the years, player numbers have been broadly consistent, and within one shard, with only the occasional exception. Maybe that's what you personally want, a game that's mainly clan-focused and always has just enough players to keep one shard full without needing a second shard. But you've got to ask yourself, is that even sustainable? Financially, the game needs to sell new copies of the game to simply continue to exist, and it needs to sell even more copies of the game in order to grow, which we know it is good enough to do, and it deserves to grow. But the potential for growth appears to be held back by the limitations of one shard and the difficulty of seeding a new shard. That is, if you assume any new shard needs to be a carbon copy of the first. For a time after the Inferno release, before the additional shards were closed, a second shard became the home for more casual players, a reserve where we could roam free and be safe behind electrified fences, fattened up and fed every day, a place to make mistakes, to learn. Perhaps a future lies in officially labeling a second shard as a place for newer players, a place they could experiment with the theory of relativity required to set up a functional facility without getting shouted at for building on a spot somebody else has already claimed. I'm curious if Able was just for serious players and Baker for more casual players. Which would you choose to play on? Anyway, as we know the game's tutorial could do with a refresh, perhaps a second, different-looking shard could also form a part of the solution to help fuel growth by making a second shard more viable for the long term. Perhaps your rank shouldn't increase or even be shown on this second, smaller, training, more casual Baker shard, keeping able as the place to be for those that want to increase their rank. Not that rank is a big motivator for Foxhole players, but this second shard could end up being a place where the regiments recruit players, almost like a feeder club from the sporting world. Alternatively, finding a way to make the able shard bigger to accommodate more players when the time comes is another obvious solution. But perhaps Baker could simply have a smaller map than able. They don't need to be a carbon copy of each other, is my point. Ultimately, I'm just throwing ideas out there to get a conversation started. I want you to tear them to shreds, if that's what it takes to stir up new ideas. All indicators point us towards the same conclusion. Fundamental change is needed. Not necessarily in Able Shard, if the recent update is anything to go by. We're going to have a great time there. Foxhole has so much potential, but will it eventually fizzle out because of the technical limitations of one shard, and the trickle of new players eventually dries up? Or will a bold step be taken to mix things up? Siege Camp are no strangers to big and bold decisions. They've made plenty over the years that have taken Foxhole to the next level, and I can't help but think that the next one needs to be right around the corner. Have you recently returned to Foxhole? Have you always been a regular player? Or are you waiting on the sidelines for a new update that will tempt you back? Perhaps you can give us a bit more detail on how the shard capacity works. I look forward to discussing all of this and more in the comments below. See ya.